Hey guys, what up? Total Control 871. We're going to be finishing up part two of our Homelessness Horseman, our first Horseman of Homelessness. On this episode, I was not expecting the first Horseman to run as long as it did. And for my newer subscribers, the device that I record on, it can only do it for 33 minutes, and then it will chapter or chop you off or whatever you want to call it. So I only got 33 minutes to save the world. Paraphrase Madonna. Anyway, so today we're going to take a look at the remainder of our first Horseman of Homelessness, dealing with idiopathic psychosis, mental illness. As we discussed in our last episode, our first horseman, it gets the biggest blame, yet it is responsible for the smallest percentage of homelessness. In our first horseman, we also see self-sabotage. I want to say a little something about self-sabotage before we jump back into our mental illness. There have been generations throughout history that have invoked the ire of the seniors, whatever you want to call it, the beatniks. Okay, everybody was worried about them. Eventually, they got their own corporate jobs. My generation, Generation X, with our trench coats and our punk rock hair and our, that whole moody Breakfast Club, don't you forget about me, so Generation X turned out to be just fine as well. And of course, the millennials and then Generation Z. And so the point that I'm making is that our Maury Povich and our Jerry Springer, I really have no idea if those shows are even on the air any longer. It's clearly that it's all fabricated anyway. They were all playing characters. Only the most stupid of people believed that they were real. But even badass kids like that thought they were big and bad enough to take on the world on their own terms, eventually even they got their shit together by and large. There's always going to be assholes that'll just simply never learn. So the whole point that I'm making here is that, our self-sabotagers, there just aren't enough of them to create the homelessness crisis that it is currently. All right, let's take a look at Ben. Oh, Ben, come on. Let's see if I'm focusing here. Ben, the two of us.
Southern California continues to battle high rates of homelessness. In part one of a sit-down interview, One America's Stefan Kleinhans spoke with HUD Secretary Ben Carson to learn more about the root causes of this issue.
All right, Dr. Carson, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So many people struggle to understand the severity of the homeless crisis, particularly in Los Angeles. You were there recently with the president. Can you describe what you saw from the poverty to the homeless encampments to just the overall struggle of the people?
Well, I'll tell you, it is a very emotionally disturbing situation to walk down those streets and see your fellow American citizens with hollowed out eyes and a look of hopelessness and desperation. And with all of their earthly belongings, in many cases, on the street. In many cases, they have some mental issues going on. And I spoke with the CEO of the American Psychiatric Association and some of his colleagues to get their take on the implications of having so many mentally ill people on the streets and what could be done about it. They indicated that a lot of those people actually could be managed on an outpatient basis, but they have to be in a setting, obviously, that would be conducive to that. And being on the street like that is not. And, I was particularly alarmed at the unsanitary conditions that people are staying in. Those are the kinds of things that can foster an epidemic, and then we really have a crisis on our hands. So it tells you that we can't just sit there and shake our heads and say, oh, that's too bad. We obviously are going to have to do something about it.
So with your background in the medical field and now you're
Come
working
on,
as a
let's
secretary,
back up here a
That's too
little
bad.
bit.
So it tells you that we can foster an epidemic, and then we really have a crisis on our hands. So
There we are. What I want you to see here is our prison layout. Let's just call it what it is. This is our prison format of warehousing the homeless. Now, there's something. Now, let's see, because we're talking about mental illness today, especially the idiopathic. And that's what's so ironic about this, is that the conservatives like Ben Carson, they like to use their first Horseman as their spear point, their driving force for incarcerating the homeless, whether it's incarceration in a jail or incarceration in a shelter that you don't have a choice, because if you're too poor to afford somewhere to live, then you don't have a choice. It's still a form of incarceration. What I want you to do, let's see, let me get some focus here. Focus. There we go. Okay. Going back to our Out of Darkness movie, Diana Ross, Paulie Cooper, paranoid schizophrenia. Now, I'm not a doctor, not a counselor, I'm not any of the people that get hired and paid fantastic amounts of money. But I can tell you this. Paranoid schizophrenics do not fare well in jails, and they do not fare well in shelters. It's why they don't want to come in. The overcrowding, the extremely cramped, close quarters,
it tells you.
This is not what a paranoid schizophrenic could thrive and flourish in. Simply not going to happen. Think I'm joking? Let's take a look.
Can I touch you now?
Oh my God, you must scare me so bad. Oh no.
Come. I'm gonna take you to bed. Shh, I'm not gonna leave you. I'm not gonna leave you. I'm not gonna leave you. Come, darling, come. Yes, come.
Hey, Ben. So explain to all of us, if this is the kind of trauma that a paranoid schizophrenic has to deal with in a private group home, you know, if this is what, this phone, sorry for the glare as well. Okay, so here, our character, Polly Cooper, like I said, they come from an affluent family. They can afford an extremely expensive group home that is designed and calibrated for dealing with the severely mentally ill. Unfortunately, um, mental illness, it doesn't take your tax bracket into account when it goes to strike. Okay. And again, we're talking about idiopathic mental illness here, not mental trauma. Okay? Idiopathic mental illness can lead you to have mental traumas, which frankly only makes things worse. In case you're wondering, being forced into a shelter while being a paranoid schizophrenic, you've now added a trauma on top of the idiopathic mental illness. Incarceration, you've now added trauma to the idiopathic mental illness. You're only making shit worse. Ben Carson talks about how he consulted a psychiatrist, the APA, and they said that the street is not a very good place for these people to be. I completely agree. Notice how they didn't say warehousing them would be a fantastic idea. They didn't say that. Ben Carson wants to lead you to believe that that's what they would have you say, but the APA, they do not. The APA probably would advocate something like a controlled environment. I completely get it because I also wanted to make this point clear. I completely understand that whether it's mental trauma or whether it's idiopathic mental illness, okay, not every homeless person is going to have the stability and the wherewithal to come into possession the right word, to be able to be housed in a setting like mine that I have here. I fully understand that, which is why we had our group home. The group home staff, they're not your $11 an hour crash course trade school person. Wow, when you talk about prisons, you for those of you who are aware of such things, prison and mental illness, the Stafford prison experiment, oh yeah, I'm going there. Power corrupting. We see that it doesn't just simply happen with prison staff, people who are in power, and I tell you what, just like how I tried to connect with you with the nursing home thing in our last episode, because eventually, your shit is going to age out to the point where you're going to need care and you're going to fucking hate it. You're going to hate the nursing home. Everybody, it doesn't make a difference if it's how nice and swank it is. People hate losing their independence. Allow me to connect with you in a particular way about the Stafford prison experiment, and how the power that people have, and how when you are disempowered, how the power can corrupt. Who's ever been out at the bar at night? Okay. Here's the peculiar thing here. when you're at the bar, having a good time, having your drinks, have you ever been wronged? Has somebody ever done something that was fucked up to you in a bar? And when you go to bring this to their attention, it doesn't really necessarily make a difference how calmly you did it or whatever the case may be. You will be perceived as a drunk that's had too much to drink. The bartender in this scenario, it's really quite fascinating. It's straight out of the annals of the Stafford Prison Experiment. The bartender is all powerful, and it doesn't make a difference who you are. You could be a fucking judge, okay, a cop or whatever it may be. The bartender is all powerful because when there is a disturbance and the police respond, they're not going to listen to anybody that is on the other side of the bar who is imbibing. They're going to talk to the bouncer and to the bartender. They are all powerful. If they say you're a problem, then you're a problem. Doesn't make a difference. Okay? That kind of abuse of power is what's exerted on people in homeless shelters and also prisons. Doesn't make a difference if you're in the right or if you're in the wrong. Okay? It's a drumhead trial. A drumhead trial that you are brought to right there, Johnny on the spot. Decisions are swift, appeals denied. So I'm trying to connect with you. Why we homeless hate shelters. Thankfully, I don't have idiopathic mental illness, although the traumas that you suffer, man, like I say, it can be a white-knuckled experience. But yes, I want to round out and close out our first Horseman of Homelessness here. The self-saboteurs, most of them work themselves out. And our idiopathic mentally ill, they don't belong in a shelter. They don't belong in state sanitariums. And quite frankly, even our scene there, the shower scene from Out of Darkness, quite frankly, even that comes off as a little fantasy-ish. Staff members climbing into bed with you to hold you and rock you to sleep. Yeah, it's a little fantasy-ish. But they are trying to convey that it is an environment that is needed, that a shelter cannot provide. Okay, a shelter cannot provide this sort of thing, and unfortunately, mental illness, idiopathic mental illness, it doesn't know anything about your economic class. Luckily, our character, Paulie Cooper, was wealthy enough to afford such a place. Unfortunately, that kind of proper care is not afforded to everybody who is stricken with mental illness, and therefore they're left to suffer on the street. Okay, let's see, what kind of time do we got here? 18. Is there anything else that I want to say about our first Horseman of Homelessness? I will say this, our Horsemen of Homelessness, they're each a funnel. You don't necessarily have to have Horseman number one. For example, I fell into homelessness via Horseman number 2, society. I don't suffer from addiction. I don't suffer from self-sabotage. I was a hard-working, you guys know my story. 28 years hard work, putting in the hours. Anyway, so it is why the second Horseman is what brings in a lot of people, but you don't have to go through all of them. And it doesn't. I just say Horseman number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. It doesn't have to happen in any particular order, none whatsoever. Before I close out, though, see, do I want to talk? I have it here now. Because Ben Carson, he goes on at the end of his interview. I don't know, maybe I'll just excuse me, I'll link it and you guys can check it out because he goes on to round out that interview actually talking about Horseman number 3. That would be the infrastructure, where he talks about the problem with it is that wake up, Ben, huh? Oh, okay. The problem is, he goes on to say that, oh, it's the housing prices, and the reason why the prices, he is basically being a good little pocket nigga in the conservative whites. The conservative white man is holding the leash to their good little black doggy. And he just basically cycles through the talking points that's been provided to him. When you get on the interviews to talk about the housing, what we want you to say is, the prices are so high because of the regulations. I mean, you really got to be a special kind of stupid. Basically, what the conservatives are trying to push, a Jedi mind trick, mind fuck of, if you lift, because there are a lot of regulations out there in California, what type of buildings you can build. Like with our CBS homeless crisis things that I referenced not too long ago, they go to talk about it as well. If you lift all of these regulations, then we can build all the housing. See, it's a housing shortage. That's what it is. Yeah, it's not that. No. It's nothing more than the real estate version of make us rich, not be able to not pay taxes, and we promise we'll raise wages. And how did that work out? So they're saying that if you lift the regulations, we trust us. But that's what it all comes down to. A bunch of we're rich, we're wealthy, trust us to police ourselves. We'll build, we'll get around eventually to building, and it never happens. Just like with our Idaho mayor and Pastor Bales and everybody else, they all talk about if they can just get everybody under their umbrella of their warehouse shelter, that we'll eventually get around to building. And it's a lie. It's a lie. They continue to vacuum in hundreds of millions of dollars from state and federal. Housing vouchers are never granted. Housing like this, it becomes some kind of fucking lottery where only very, very few actually get to get housing like this. Who, I guess we can get into talking about who would actually benefit, who is able to have housing like I have. Let's take a look at a few people. Insignia of distress. Brian Ellinger. Love of God is everything. Grant D. Travels. And of course, who could forget invisible people and the great multitude of homeless people that have been featured on their channel over the years. Now, the people that I just showed you, channels that I subscribe to, each case is radically different. I don't speak for any of the people. I'm not here to tell you that they can or cannot handle housing. Other than what they share on their channels, I really don't know much more else about them. Although, in my own personal life, from my own personal observations of homeless people whom I've dealt with more closely, it might surprise you who can handle housing and who cannot. There are many people out there who will self-sabotage like you would not believe. And it isn't necessarily the person who talks to themselves. Just saying. Housing. Who should get it and who should not? And unfortunately, we can't trust our nonprofits to create the data. Remember, they have a vested interest in this thing, a very substantial stake and vested interest. To give you an example of how data can be skewered, political polls sometimes will call me and I will tell them, I'm happy to participate in your polling, but I don't answer bundled questions. A bundled question is, they'll ask, if politician A is breaking his oath and they're this, that, and the other, will you be voting for them? Now, I might not be voting for politician A, but it might not be because I think they've broken their oath or broken the law or whatever the case may be. You're bundling your questions. So if I say no, I'm not going to vote for that person, then they'll take that artificially skewered data and then you'll get your talking heads on TV that says, oh, 56% of the population agree that politician A has broken their oath and the law. That's not what I said. I have my own reasons for not voting for politician A. You just never asked me those questions. You bundled it all together. It's kind of what ends up happening with the data that gets collected about us homeless people. It's skewered and manipulated. And remember, these nonprofits that the government cannot get enough of hiring and putting on the payroll, putting on the dole, they have a very vested interest in making sure that they can warehouse you, to put you in a gigantic warehouse like we saw in our Ben Carson video, so that they can put you on merry-go-round services that ultimately go nowhere. There is no William Levitt Savior coming for us. Nobody's going to break ground. When are we going to finally get the affordable housing? A lot of what I just said kind of has to do with Horseman number 3. So I'll save you. Horseman number 3, yeah, get ready. I'm going to be referencing Good Times, the projects. What's a project? What makes a project a project? So much of our suburban whites are pouring out of the suburbs and into cities, living in these alternative fashions. Alternative fashions in the city. So how come with them it's gentrification, but when blacks take control, it's a slum project? Oh yes, God damn it. I'm going to be talking about all this fucking shit in this series. I had a commenter in the last episode talk about, oh my God, you're being anti-Semitic. I'm not being anti-Semitic. I am analyzing the fuck out of this crisis, and nobody's going to be safe from my scrutiny. Total Control 871.